Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hi everyone, this is Malika Pathak from Miranda House, University of Delhi. I am starting with the topic liquid state, and this is for the students of BSc Honours Chemistry and BSc with Chemistry. This is Module 4, Lecture 1 of the series. The academic expert of the course is Dr. Amrita T. Sheikh, and the recording is being done under the DTH Swayam Prabha project of the MHRD, New Delhi. Now, in the previous 6 lectures, we have taken a look at the gases, their properties, the theories related to the gaseous state. We have talked about collision. Today, we are going to talk about liquids. We are going to take a look at the intermolecular forces in liquids, what kinds, how do they vary. Then, we are going to talk about some of the properties of liquids like surface tension, viscosity and vapor pressure. Although we have discussed about viscosity of gases in the previous lecture, but today we are going to take a look at the viscosity for liquids. So let's start with the topic. In the previous lectures we have studied that in gases the molecules are in state of random motion, and furthermore there are no appreciable forces of attraction amongst them. On the other hand, in crystalline solids, due to strong attractive forces, the constituents are arranged in a perfectly ordered manner in fixed positions. The liquid state lies in between the gaseous and the solid state in the sense that there is neither the ordered arrangement of constituents nor the complete disorder as in gases. It is generally observed that some of the properties of liquids closely resemble that of gases, while some of the properties resemble that of solids. In the light of the kinetic molecular theory, liquids may be considered as a continuation of gases into the region of small volumes and high molecular attraction. The cohesive forces in a liquid are stronger than those in gases, even at the higher pressures, and are sufficiently high to keep the molecules confined to a definite volume. The positions of the molecules in the liquids are not rigidly fixed. These forces are not strong enough to entirely eliminate the movements of the molecules. Thus, the molecules in the liquid have much shorter mean free path as compared to the gas molecules. Properties of liquids can be explained on the basis of their characteristic properties. Let's talk about properties of liquids. Unlike gases, liquids do not respond dramatically to temperature and pressure changes. In fact, some of the properties that are listed here are: liquids have a variable shape but a fixed volume. They in fact take the shape of their container. Also, they flow readily. However, not all the liquids flow at the same rate. Now, both of these properties are result of their intermolecular forces, which lie between that of solids and gases. So the intermolecular forces in liquids are weaker than the solids but stronger than that in gases. They in fact are 10 to the power 6 times stronger than the gases. How do we know that? Because the molecules of the liquids do not spontaneously move away from each other. They remain together. They are bound to each other. So that is why we have fixed volume. Although they are weaker than that of solids, because that is why they are able to take the shape of the container. Also, liquids do not compress or expand significantly. The volume of a liquid varies very little as the temperature and pressure changes. They have high density compared to the gases. In fact, their densities are 1000 times more than that of gases. They are soluble. They can mix into one another, but lower speed as compared to that in gases. Now, why are these properties there? Most of these properties have everything to do with intermolecular forces. Now, because the intermolecular forces are that between that of solids and gases, therefore the intermolecular spaces are also between those of solids and gases. Now, most of the volume of the liquid that we talk about is actually taken up by the molecules of the liquid. So there is very little space between the molecules. Therefore, you cannot compress them. They are less compressible as compared to the gases. They have higher density. And all these properties are arising because of the intermolecular forces, intermolecular spaces between them. Now, they are also soluble into one another, because if they have similar properties, they are soluble. In fact, that is why we say like dissolves like. So, liquids follow this property. So, if you have polar liquids, they will mix with each other. If you have non-polar liquids, they will mix with each other. A polar liquid and non-polar liquid will not mix with each other. So that's why we have terms like miscibility, immiscible, partially miscible. We're going to talk about it later. Now let's talk about the intermolecular forces which are there in liquids. We have said that they are between those of solids and gases. Now what kind of forces are we talking about? So an intermolecular force are attraction forces between the molecules. So molecule 1, molecule 2, the forces that exist between the two molecules are called as intermolecular forces, whereas the forces that exist between a molecule, they are called as intramolecular forces. So bonds like ionic bond, covalent bond, they are all part of intramolecular forces. Some properties of liquids such as vapor pressure, viscosity and surface tension are determined by the strength of attraction between the molecules. It must be remembered that intermolecular bonds or intermolecular forces are much weaker than the intramolecular forces or bonds. Now, all of us have studied about polar molecules. What are polar molecules? Where there is a unsymmetric distribution of charges. So you have one pole, which is one place where there is deficiency of electrons, and that has become slightly positive. Then there is that portion where there is excess of electrons, excess of electron density, then that becomes negatively charged. Now because there have been generation of two poles, a positive pole and a negative pole, that is called as a dipole. So this uneven distribution of electrons results in a dipole. Now, intermolecular attractions result from temporary or permanent dipole in the molecules, and there are three intermolecular forces in liquids that we specifically talk about. One is dispersion forces, dipole forces and hydrogen bonds. We are going to discuss all three of them in detail. Let's start with dipole interaction. So what happens in a dipole interaction? Now there can be various kind of dipole interaction. You can have dipole-dipole interaction. You can have dipole-induced dipole interaction. You can have ion-induced dipole interaction. You can have ion-dipole interaction, and they all are put under one category of dipole interaction. You can study them separately also, but right now I'm going to put them in one category because that's not part of our syllabus. It's just to introduce you to the concept of liquids. So when we talk about dipole interaction, so what is a dipole? Where di means two, so pole, something which has two poles is called as a dipole. So a molecule where across a covalent bond, a development of slightly positive charge or a partially positive charge has been developed and a partial negative charge has been developed, that is called as a dipole case. Now, the most common example that you've studied is HCl. So HCl is covalently bonded, so there is a covalent bond between H and Cl. Now because chlorine is more electronegative than H, there is a development of partial negative charge at Cl and a partial positive charge at the H end. Now this dipole which is there will be present in all the HCl molecules. So what you will find is that the negative end of one HCl will be attracted towards the positive end of the other HCl molecule. So there will be an orientation which has developed. The negative end attracted towards the positive end, and the positive end attracted towards the negative end. So you will have positive end of one molecule attracted towards the negative, and the negative end of the one molecule attracted towards the positive. So there is an orientation which has developed. And why has it developed? Because the molecule was polar in nature. There was a dipole which was existing, and these dipoles started interacting with them. Now, dipole interactions are relatively strong forces as compared to the weakest forces that we are going to talk about later, the dispersion forces. So, dipole interaction, you can have dipole induced dipole, ion induced dipole, but why have they developed? Because you have dipoles which are present. So, in the case of HCl, we are talking about dipole-dipole interaction. You can also have a case when you put an ion into a solution and that ion induces a dipole into a molecule. So a non-polar molecule was there and you put an ion in a solution. Now that, let's say the ion was positively charged or it was a cation, then it will induce a negative charge on the nearer end of the molecule, and because there is a development of negative charge near the ion, because the ion was positive in nature, there will be a development of positive charge on the other end. So this is called as ion induced dipole. You can also have a case where the molecule was already polar in nature and you put an ion into a solution of a polar molecule. So then that is called as ion dipole interaction. So these kind of forces are there, and they are because there is a development of small or relatively small, not very very small, but relatively small uh, positive or negative charges. Now, these dipole forces are typically 10% of a covalent bond strength, so not very strong actually, but strong enough to affect the property of a liquid. So, you will find that molecules which have slight polarity will have higher melting and boiling points as compared to molecules which have no polarity at all. Because the molecules which have no polarity have one different kind of force that we are going to talk about, which is dispersion force, which are very very weak in nature. So as compared to the dispersion forces, they are having dipole interactions. So that because of the dipole interaction, these molecules are going to have higher melting and boiling point. Now let's talk about the dispersion forces. These dispersion forces are also called as London forces, and they are due to the development of a temporary dipole in a molecule. So why has this temporary dipole developed? See, you have a nucleus in an atom and the electrons are revolving around it. At any given point, the electron cloud is at a distance from the nucleus, and this is the electron cloud, and let's say this is the nucleus. The nucleus is positively charged. So you have a development of a dipole which is there in the atom also. Now because of that, there is an instantaneous dipole. Why is that instantaneous? Because it's only for a fraction of a second, because it's continuously moving. This electron cloud is continuously moving, and because of that there is no fixed position of that dipole. But because of that development of a dipole, a temporary separation of charges has taken place, and this temporary separation of charge has induced another dipole in the neighboring non-polar molecule. So there was temporary dipole in one molecule, and because of that there is another dipole induced in the neighboring non-polar molecule, and that is why you have some kind of interaction which is taking place. So in other words, what we are saying is that electrons are constantly shifting, and a region may become temporarily electron poor and slightly positive, while another region may become slightly negative. So this is only for a very short fraction of time. Because of the temporary dipole, two molecules, because of their temporary dipoles, have been attracted to each other. But because this is only for a fraction of time, this is a very weak kind of force. As compared to the dipole interaction, the dispersion forces or the London forces are very very weak in nature. Why are they called as London? Because they were described by F. London to explain the some kind of forces in the nature. Now dispersion forces are present in all molecules, but they are important in what? They are important in non-polar molecules. So that is very very important. So the strength of these dispersion forces in a molecule is related to the number of electrons that are there in the molecule. So the more the number of electrons, the more is a separation of charge, and therefore stronger is the dispersion forces. So that is why I must say, if you have two kinds of liquids, you have a liquid which has polarity, a liquid which has non-polar, which will have higher melting point or a boiling point, the one which has polarity, because the dipole-dipole interaction or the polarity interactions are more than the dispersion forces or the London forces or the van der Waals. These forces are also called as van der Waals forces because they are due to the instantaneous dipole that is developed. So therefore, in fact, they are called as instantaneous dipole induced dipole interaction. So very, very weak in nature, but they are there. Now let's talk about, so we've talked about two kinds of forces. One is dipole forces, dipole interaction. The other is the London forces. Now we're going to talk about what is called as hydrogen bonds. Now hydrogen bonds are a special type of dipole interaction, and they're very important because water gets all its properties because of these hydrogen bonds. Now, hydrogen bonds are not just present in water, they are present in other liquids also. And where are they present? They are present in a molecule which have hydrogen bonded to an electronegative atom like nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine. So whenever there is a molecule which has a hydrogen bonded to an electronegative atom like nitrogen, oxygen or fluorine, this molecule will form a hydrogen bond. Now, I have said that hydrogen bonds are especially important in water. So let's see how it is important. So let's see, this is water. You have oxygen and then these are two hydrogens. Now, oxygen is bonded to hydrogen. In such cases there, then the hydrogen which is bonded to oxygen interacts, it's like a polarity interaction only. It interacts with the oxygen of the other molecule. The hydrogen of the hydrogen bonded molecule interact with the electronegative atom of the other hydrogen bonded hydrogen containing molecule. So you have water. So the H of the first water molecule is interacting with the oxygen of the other water molecule, and this kind of interaction is hydrogen bonding. It is much more stronger as compared to the dipole interaction because any molecule which has hydrogen bonding will have higher values of melting point and boiling point as compared to only molecules which have dipole interactions there, whether it is dipole-dipole, dipole-induced dipole, ion-induced dipole, but the hydrogen and hydrogen bonding is very important because it is responsible for life on earth, because it is giving that special property to water which other molecules are not getting. So hydrogen bonding is there. So we've talked about water. You can also have hydrogen bonding in HF, ammonia. So wherever hydrogen is attached to an electronegative atom, there is development of this kind of bonding which is there. So now we have talked about the various kind of interactions. Now let's talk about very important concept that you've studied in 11th standard. I'm just doing a recap of very basic liquid part that you've already studied in earlier class, because we want to have some understanding of what is liquid before we talk about other important properties of liquid. So one property of liquid that you have studied is capillary action. Now this capillary action of the liquid is the ability of a liquid to rise or fall in a glass tube of the container. Now this capillary action that you have studied is because of the two kinds of forces that are there. That is the comparison between the cohesive and the adhesive forces. Now, so what are cohesive forces? We have already studied in our previous classes that cohesive forces are those forces that are present in molecules of the same kind. Adhesive forces are when there are forces between molecules of the different kind. So cohesive forces when the molecules of the liquid are attracted to each other. Adhesive forces when the molecules of the liquid are attracted to the molecules of the solid surface. So you have cohesive and adhesive forces. Now this capillary action, so capillary actually has been taken from a Greek word scapula, which is what? Hair-like. So something which is hair-like and very thin is called as capillary. So you have capillaries which are used in the laboratories, which are thin, very, very thin tubes. So something which is very thin, as not as fine as hair, but yes, comparative to the hair, is called as capillary. So when a liquid either rises into a capillary or falls in a capillary, that action is called as a capillary action. Now, when you so just take this example. We have a beaker here, and that has water. Now, if you put a capillary in this, what you will find is that the water will rise into the capillary, and the level of the water in the capillary is higher than that is the level of the water which is there in the beaker. Whereas if you put a capillary in a beaker containing liquid mercury, then what you will find is that the level of the liquid is below the level of the liquid in the beaker. So what is happening here? That the water has risen into the capillary. Whereas what has happened in this case? Mercury has mercury has fallen into the capillary. So the level of the liquid in the capillary is higher in the case of water, and it is lower in the case of mercury. And why is it happening? This is happening because of the adhesive and the cohesive forces difference. Now, if you have a wetting liquid, so you've studied about water wetting liquids. So when you have a wetting liquid or a liquid which binds more to the surface of the solid, then the adhesive forces are more and cohesive forces, the forces which are between the molecules of the liquid, are less, then the capillary rise will take place. But when there is a case when the molecules of the liquid are more attracted towards each other and less towards the surface, then the capillary fall will take place. So when the cohesive forces are less, adhesive forces are more, you have capillary rise. When the cohesive forces are more and the adhesive forces are less, then there is a capillary fall. And this is very, very important property. It is responsible for many things that you observe in nature. The When you dip a paper into a liquid, you will see that the water rises into the paper. You will see that the water is moving up the paper. That is also due to the capillary action. So many properties that you see in nature are due to the capillary action. So now we are starting with the major content of the liquid that is part of your undergraduate syllabus. That is called as surface tension. Consider a liquid which is present in a beaker. Now let's divide this liquid into two states. Some molecules are present in the bulk of the liquid, some molecules are present on the surface of the liquid. Now let's take the case of the molecules which are present in the bulk, that is inside the liquid. Now the molecule which is present inside the liquid is attracted by the neighboring molecules of the liquid from all directions, so it experiences a net zero force of attraction. There is no force of attraction on this molecule because it is attracted from all the sides by the other molecules. Whereas, let's take a case of this molecule B which is present on the surface. Now this molecule B which is present on the surface is attracted by molecules only from one side, that is from the inside. So it experiences a net inward pull, and there is a net downward force of attraction which is there. So this unbalanced attractive force tends to draw the surface molecules towards the inside of the liquid, and the surface of the liquid tends to contract to a smallest possible area. So what is happening? I'm repeating. You have a molecule which is present in the bulk, which is attracted from all the sides, and therefore there is no net attractive force of attraction. But whereas a molecule which is present on the surface experiences a net downward pull or a net downward force of attraction, which tends to contract the surface to a smallest possible area. Now this force, this tension that exists on the surface of the liquid is a state of tension, and that is why it is called as surface tension. Now, how do we define surface tension. So surface tension is defined as the force which is acting per unit length along the surface of a liquid at right angles to an imaginary line drawn on the surface of the liquid. I am repeating. What is it? Let us imagine that this is the surface of a liquid. So surface tension is defined as the force which is acting per unit length. I am repeating, it is a force acting per unit length along the surface. So this is the surface, along the surface of the liquid at right angles. So let us imagine that there is an imaginary line on the surface of the liquid, and the force which is perpendicular to that imaginary line drawn on the surface of the liquid is called as the surface tension. So I'm repeating, it is the force acting per unit length along the surface. So the surface पे जो force है, so force acting along the surface of the liquid at right angles to an imaginary line which is also supposed to be drawn on the surface of the liquid, that is called as the surface tension. Now this surface tension is represented by the symbol gamma, Greek letter gamma, and its units are Newton per meter inverse, because what have we defined surface tension as? Force per unit length. So force, the unit of force is Newton, SI unit, and what is the SI unit of length? Meter. So Newton meter inverse. The CGS unit will be what? Dyne centimeter inverse. So this is the definition. Now how do we define surface energy? Now because of this inward pull that the molecules on the surface are feeling, the surface of the liquid is always tending to contract to the smallest possible area. Now if we want to increase that surface area, we will have to exert some force on it. So surface energy is defined as the work which is required to extend the surface by unit area. So work is needed to be done to bring the molecules from the bulk of the liquid to the surface, and that is called as surface energy, because the work has to be done against the attractive forces that the molecules of the liquid are experiencing. The units are joules per meter square or erg per centimeter square in CGS units. The values are numerically same for surface tension and surface energy. In fact, they are dimensionally also same. Now let's talk about interfacial tension. So when you have two immiscible liquids or partially miscible liquids and they are placed over one another, we know that the immiscible liquids have different polarities. That is, the concept is like dissolves like, and if they are not having the similar properties, they will not mix with each other. Now if you take two immiscible liquids, then the point at which they make contact with each other, that is called as interface. So the tension which exists at the interface between the two immiscible liquids is known as interfacial tension, and this interfacial tension will have values which are less than the larger of the surface tension values of the two liquids. I'm repeating, the interfacial tension value is going to be smaller than the larger of the surface tension values of the two liquids. We have now discussing about the other properties of liquid which are dependent on cohesion or adhesive forces. So now since we are talking about surface tension, let's see what does cohesion and adhesive forces have to do with it. So cohesion forces, I'm repeating, were forces which were intramolecular in nature. Adhesion forces were those which were intermolecular in nature. That is, cohesion between the molecules of a liquid, adhesion between the molecules of a liquid and a solid. Now when the adhesion forces are stronger than the cohesion forces, the liquid will spread over the solid. So example, water on a glass, and the angle of contact that is there is smaller than 90 degrees. Now what is the angle of contact? The angle between the tangent to the liquid surface at the point of contact and the solid surface within the liquid is called as the angle of contact. I'm repeating, what is angle of contact? Angle of contact is the angle between the tangent to the liquid surface at the point of contact to the solid surface within the liquid is called as the angle of contact. And for the values of angle of contact between liquid and solid surface can range between 0 to 180 degree. So you can have various kinds of angle of contact values, and that will determine the meniscus that is formed. So we talk about upper meniscus, lower meniscus. We have already talked about it, and that has happened because the adhesive and the cohesive forces values were differing, and the molecules were either having one as mode or the other as mode. Now let's talk about the factors which affect the surface tension. Nature, temperature and solute. Now nature of the liquid is one thing that the surface tension values are particular for a particular liquid, so they can't be changed. So each liquid will have a particular characteristic value of surface tension that will be its own personal characteristic. So that is one thing. The other is, let's talk about temperature, which is something that we can change. The nature is something that is that of the liquid and can't be changed, so each liquid will have its own characteristics. But the temperature, for each liquid you can change the temperature and you can change the values of surface tension. So how does this variation take place? Let's talk about it. So what happens is, you will realize as the temperature increases, the surface tension of a liquid will decrease. Why is it decreasing? Because when you increase the temperature, the kinetic energy of the molecules increases, and when there is an increased kinetic energy, it will weaken the cohesive forces, so the molecules are more free to move about, and because they are more free to move about, the surface tension value will decrease. In fact, there is this property that at critical temperature the surface tension of a liquid becomes zero, and Ramsay and Shield gave this equation to explain this concept. So gamma into molar volume to the power of 2 by 3 is equal to K into Tc, which is the critical temperature, minus the temperature that is in use or the observation, minus 6. So if we want to see the relationship between the temperature and the surface tension, then Ramsay and Shield equation was one of the equations which was used to explain it. I'm repeating, when you increase the temperature, the surface tension decreases. And why is it decreasing? Because there is an increase in the kinetic energy, which is weakening the cohesive forces. So if I am given a particular temperature, I can find out the surface tension if I know the values of molar volume, critical temperature and the constant K. Now let's try and find out the various methods of measuring the surface tension. So these are some of the methods that are given here. Some of these methods that are given can be used to find out the value of surface tension. The others can be used to find out the values of interfacial tension, and some can be used to find out the value of both surface tension and interfacial tension. Let's try and take a look at it. Capillary rise method, de novo tensiometer method, bubble pressure method, drop formation method, which is actually a stalagmometer method. So there are two kinds, drop weight method and drop number method. Wilhelmy plate method, spinning drop method, pendant drop method, sessile drop method. Now the ones which are majorly part of your syllabus are capillary rise method, drop weight and drop number methods, because these are the two methods that you actually use in your laboratories to find out the values of surface tension. The other methods are used in advanced classes or in your postgraduate syllabus. Let's start with the capillary rise method. Now capillary rise method is based on the concept that when a capillary tube is placed in a liquid contained in a beaker, the liquid generally rises up in the capillary to a certain distance. Now why has the liquid risen up? Because the adhesive forces between the molecules of the liquid and the walls of the capillary are more than the cohesive forces that exist between the liquid. So this liquid is actually called as a wetting liquid because it spreads over the capillary surface and rises up into the capillary. Now till what time does it rise? It rises till the upward force, which is taking it upwards, that is the surface tension force, is exactly balanced by the downward force due to gravity. So the moment the upward force due to surface tension is balanced by the downward force due to gravity, an equilibrium is established. And as soon as the equilibrium is established, the liquid stops rising. Now, if we can measure the height to which the liquid has risen in the capillary, we can use this to find out the surface tension of the liquid. So let us assume that we have taken a capillary whose radius is r and it has risen in the capillary to a height of h. Now, the upward force at any point on the circumference of the liquid will be given by gamma cos theta. So, what is the upward force which is taking the liquid upwards? It is the surface tension. And what is the exact value of the force? Gamma cos theta, where theta is the contact angle between the surface of the liquid and the capillary wall. Now, this force is at any given point on the capillary. Now, how many such points are going to be there? There are going to be 2 pi r points, because the circumference of the capillary tube is what? 2 pi r. So, the total upward force inside the circumference of the tube is 2 pi r gamma cos theta, where r is the inside radius of the capillary tube. Now we know that for water, the contact angle is 0 degrees because water completely wets the capillary wall. There are some liquids where angle is so small that the cos theta approaches 1. So in the case of water, it completely wets the liquid. So theta is 0 and cos 0 is 1. There are certain liquids where angle is small and that can also be taken as 0, and therefore cos theta will approach 1. So in that case, our total upward force was 2 pi r gamma cos theta, but because cos theta has become 1, therefore the total upward force inside the circumference of the tube for the wetting liquid has become 2 pi r gamma. It has become 2 pi r gamma. Now this is the upward force which is taking the liquid up in the capillary. So this is the reason the liquid is rising in the capillary. But there is always a downward force due to the gravity which is acting on the liquid, and that depends on the weight of the liquid in the capillary. So what is the value of the downward force? Now downward force depends on the mass and the gravity. So what is mass equal to? Volume into density. So volume into density into gravity will give you the value of the downward force. Now what is the volume of a capillary? It is a cylindrical system. So pi r square h is the volume. What is the density of the liquid? Let us assume it to be rho. Gravity is g. So the downward force is pi r square h rho g. Now this is the downward force. The upward force was 2 pi r gamma, and at equilibrium, when the liquid stops rising, the upward force due to surface tension is exactly balanced by the downward force due to gravity. So 2 pi r gamma is equal to pi r square h rho g. Therefore, you can use this to find out the value of surface tension. The surface tension is given by 1 by 2 r h rho g. So if you know the radius of the capillary, you know the height to which the liquid has risen, you know the density of the liquid, and you know the value of gravity already. So you can get the value of surface tension. Now, the thing that has to be remembered is that you can measure the height of the liquid which has risen in a capillary due to an instrument called as cathetometer, and the radius of the capillary can be measured by using a traveling microscope. So cathetometer for measuring the height of the liquid, and the radius of the capillary through a traveling microscope. Now this method is called as capillary rise method. There is a modification of this method which is being used a lot, which is called as differential capillary rise method, where if you take two liquids and two capillaries of radius 1 and radius 2, and you can apply the same equation and find out the difference in the height and use it to calculate the value of the surface tension. So this is called as capillary rise method, and this will give you the value of the surface tension, that is gamma, which is equal to 1 by 2 r h rho g. Okay, let us start with the Dunois ring detachment method. Now this is a technique for measuring the surface tension of a liquid. This method involves slowly lifting a ring, often made of platinum, from the surface of the liquid. the force F, which is required to raise the ring from the liquid's surface, is measured and is related to the liquid's surface tension gamma. So the principle is that this force which is required to detach a platinum iridium ring from the liquid surface or the interface of two immiscible liquids is actually proportional to the surface or the interfacial tension. I'm repeating. What does it say? It says that the force which is required to detach a platinum iridium ring from the liquid surface or the interface of the two immiscible liquids will be proportional to the surface tension in the case of only liquid or the interfacial tension for the interface between the two immiscible liquids. Now let us see how does the instrument look like. So this is the instrument's look. This instrument looks like this. So in this instrument, this is the torsion lever. This is the torsion lever. There is a liquid sample which is kept. Now can you see this hook? This hook has a ring attached to the bottom and this ring is dipped into the liquid surface. Right? Now there is this torsion. This torsion is actually fixed on one end and is attached to a knob on the other end. So you are actually trying to pull the iridium ring from the liquid. So the point at which it detaches, the measurement of the force is done on this calibrated cylinder. So this reading that you get is actually proportional to the force that was required to detach the ring from the liquid surface. So the instrument of the Dunois looks like this. We saw in the previous slide. So this is the torsion lever. This is fixed on one end and is attached to the hook which has a ring here. Now this is the sample liquid, and now when you have a torsion adjusting knob with the dial calibrated and you rotate, the point at which this ring detaches is proportional to the surface tension. The concept is same as the capillary rise method. The concept is that the force which is required to detach the ring is proportional to the surface tension of the liquid, or the force which is required to pull the ring from the interface between the two immiscible liquids is proportional to the interfacial tension. So the procedure that is followed is that you take a clean platinum iridium ring which is attached to the hook at the end of the torsion. Now when one end of the torsion wire is fixed, the other is attached to a knob carrying a pointer. The pointer is moving on a fixed scale. You can see this is a scale which has been calibrated and is fixed in nature. Now you want to measure the surface tension of the liquid. That liquid is taken in this petri dish kind of thing. So the liquid whose surface tension is to be determined is placed in a watch glass so that the platinum ring is just touching the surface. Now what you do is you rotate the knob of the torsion wire slowly till the ring is just detached from the surface. Now this reading will be read on the dial and that will be proportional to the upward force, and that force is nothing but force which is proportional to the surface tension. So let's take a look at the principle behind this. Now we can use this for measuring the surface tension and we can use this for measuring the interfacial tension. So let us say we want to measure the surface tension or the interfacial tension of the liquid. Then the force which is acting on the ring circumference is 2 pi r gamma. We already know gamma is the surface tension. So at each point on the circular ring, you have a force which is acting as gamma, and for the whole ring it will be 2 pi r gamma. Now the liquid film will be lifted above the ring, will have two surfaces. You will have a surface which is above and there will be a surface which is below. So you have two surfaces, outer and inner surface. Now there is a downward force which is acting on the ring, on the liquid which is present within the ring, and that is mg. So this force mg, which is due to gravity or the mass or the weight of the liquid, is exactly balanced by the upward force which is making the liquid stick to the surface. So that is equal to gamma into 2 pi r, the circumference, into two surfaces. So the circumference of the ring has total force of 2 pi r gamma, and because we have two surfaces, an upper surface and a lower surface, so the total force is 2 pi r into 2 gamma, and that is exactly equal to the weight of the liquid which is present on the ring. Now when the upward pull of the ring exceeds the weight of the liquid, the ring will detach. Now let's suppose that there is a liquid which is a completely wetting liquid like water, which makes a zero angle of contact with the ring. So at equilibrium, the upward force and the downward force are going to be equal, and the dial reading, what we have already explained before, the dial reading will be proportional to the gamma into 2 pi r into 2. So if you can measure the dial reading in the instrument, then you can get the value of the surface tension. You must remember that in this method, there is a possibility of error up to 25% if you do not apply a correction factor. So this correction factor needs to be applied. So when you study in detail, you will also study about the correction factor which are there. So this is the Dunoy method. Let's do another method which is called as bubble pressure method. So in this method, a capillary tube is first immersed in the liquid sample, and subsequently a constant flow of gas is purged through the tube, forming small bubbles in the liquid. The pressure which is needed to form a bubble is measured, and the surface tension of the sample is calculated from the pressure difference between the inside and outside the bubble and the radius of the bubble. So the formula that is used is P is equal to H rho G plus 2 gamma R. Now the bubble pressure method, Dunoy ring detachment method, the capillary rise method, these are methods which are slightly difficult to perform in the undergraduate labs, because in the case of capillary rise method, you have to actually measure the radius of the capillary. Now capillary is very fine, and you have to measure the radius of the capillary. You also have to measure the height. Now height measurement is okay, but the measurement of the radius has to be exact, because it is based on that method. So it's not very easy to perform in the undergraduate lab, especially when the instruments in the undergraduate labs are not so sophisticated. Now coming to the Dunoy ring detachment method, it requires a specialized instrument. That instrument is also not available in most of the undergraduate labs. So again, very difficult to perform in the undergraduate lab. The bubble pressure method is in itself a little complicated, because you have to measure the pressure which is required to measure to form the bubbles inside the liquid, and the accurate measurement of the pressure which is required to form the bubble is a slightly difficult concept for the undergraduate students to perform. So these methods are not used in the undergraduate lab. The method which is normally used in the undergraduate lab is based on the formation of drops in an instrument which is called as stalagmometer. I shouldn't call it an instrument, it's an apparatus, it's a glass apparatus, um, which is called as stalagmometer, and it is based on the concept of formation of drops of a liquid. So let's do the drop formation method. There are two drop formation methods which are normally performed in the undergraduate labs, the drop weight method and the drop number method. And they're performed using an instrument called as stalagmometer, which is nothing but a glass apparatus which has a look of a glass pipette with a round or a spherical bulb in the middle and a capillary in the lower part. So this is the way your stalagmometer looks like. You have a capillary in the lower part that is below the bulb. Now what happens is that you allow a drop of liquid to form from the capillary or the lower end of the capillary, and this drop which is formed is supported by the upward force of surface tension which is acting on the outer circumference of the ring of the capillary. So I'm repeating, you are allowing, the method is based on the concept that you are allowing a drop of liquid to form at the lower end of the capillary. Now this drop is supported by an upward force of surface tension which is acting along the circumference of the capillary ring. Now this drop that is formed should be almost spherical in nature, and this drop has two forces which are acting on it. So you have an upward force due to surface tension which is acting on it, and there is a downward force due to gravity which is acting on it. When these forces get balanced, the drop detaches itself. And this concept is used to find out the value of the surface tension of the liquid that is under observation. I'm repeating, you allow a drop to fall. The drop will detach itself when the upward force due to the surface tension is exactly balanced by the weight of the drop. And this concept can be used to find out the surface tension of the liquid. Drop weight method, or the method of measuring the weight of the drops. So if you have a capillary filled with the liquid, then the size of the drop which is falling from the capillary depends on the radius of the capillary and also on the surface tension of the liquid which is present inside the capillary. So if a liquid is allowed to flow through a capillary, the drop will increase up to a certain height and then will fall off. Now when will this happen? This will happen when the two forces, there is an upward force which is the surface tension force due to which the drop is attached to the capillary, and there is a downward force which is due to the weight of the drops. So there is an upward force due to the surface tension, downward force due to the weight of the drops. The point at which the weight of the drops just exceeds the surface tension force, the drop detaches and falls down. So this method is also based on the formation of exact spherical drops. So if you want to perform this experiment, how do you go about doing it? There are certain things that you have to do. First, you have to set the rate of flow of drops which are falling from a stalagmometer. So you have to keep it between 15 to 30. I have explained the reason before, that it should not be too less, otherwise the experiment will take long time to perform. If it is too fast, then the drops which are getting formed are not spherical, and this method is based on the formation of spherical drops. So that is the first part. Then once you have done this, this method is essentially based on the comparison of two liquids. So you can use this method only when you have one liquid whose surface tension value is exactly known. So it is a referential kind of method where you have to know the surface tension of one liquid exactly or accurately, and then you can find out the surface tension of the other liquid with reference to the first liquid. So this method is based on that. So how do you perform this experiment? You set the rate of flow. Once you've done that, you will take a pre-weighed clean dry weighing bottle. Then you will suck up the liquid 1 whose surface tension is already known into the stalagmometer, clamp the stalagmometer, put the pre-weighed clean dry weighing bottle below it, and count some fixed number of drops into the weighing bottle. So let's say you've counted some 30 drops into the pre-weighed clean dry weighing bottle. Now you have the weighing bottle whose mass was already known. You have a weighing bottle with 30 drops. You subtract and take the difference between the two, you will get the mass of 30 drops or weight of 30 drops. You can use that to calculate the weight of one drop of first liquid. Now you will perform the same experiment with the other liquid. You will again suck up the liquid into the stalagmometer after rinsing it with the second liquid. You will clamp it. You will again take the weighing bottle. You will again count that fixed number, the number that you had taken for the previous liquid. So let's say you've taken 30 drops for the first liquid. You will again take 30 drops for the second liquid and take them in the weighing bottle. Take its mass. Take out the difference between the empty weighing bottle and the weighing bottle plus 30 drops. You will get the mass of 30 drops. You can use it to get the mass of 1 drop. So you've got two masses, mass of 1 drop of liquid 1, mass of one drop of liquid 1, 2. So this is the procedure. Now how do you take this procedure to find out the value of surface tension? Let's see to this. So what happens is there is an upward force which is acting on the drop, which is trying to keep it attached to the capillary. That upward force at any point on the circumference is equal to gamma cos theta, where theta is the contact angle between the surface of the liquid and the capillary wall. Now, the total upward force, so at each point, the upward force is gamma cos theta. So, the total upward force inside the capillary circumference will be equal to what? 2 pi r gamma cos theta, where r is the inside radius of the capillary tube, the radius of the capillary to which the spherical drop is attached. Now, for wetting liquids like water, this value of theta is 0 degree. There are some other liquids whose value is closer to 0 degree, so cos theta can always be taken as equal to 1. So, the total upward force which is acting acting on the drop inside the circumference of the tube is equal to 2 pi r gamma for a wetting liquid. Now, the drop was having an upward force which is trying to keep it attached to the capillary. There is a downward force due to the weight of the drop. That force is equal to mg. Now the drop will detach itself the moment this downward force or the gravitational force just exceeds the surface tension force. So at the point where they are in equilibrium, where the downward force is equal to the upward force, the mg is equal to 2 pi r gamma. Now if there are two liquids, you can write two equations. Similarly, you can write m1g is equal to 2 pi r gamma 1. You can write m2g is equal to 2 pi r gamma 2. If I take the ratio of the two equations, then I will get m1 by m2 is equal to gamma 1 by gamma 2. So if you know the surface tension of the liquid, one liquid, you can find out the surface tension of the other liquid because you've already measured the masses of the two drops. So you have mass of one drop of liquid 1, you have mass of one drop of liquid 2, and you can take the surface tension of the known liquid and find out the surface tension of the unknown liquid. So this method is used for finding out the surface tension when the surface tension of one liquid is known to you. Let's do a numerical to get a better understanding of the drop number and the drop weight method. So the numerical reads as equal volumes of an organic liquid and water gave 55 drops and 35 drops respectively. The densities of water and the organic liquid are 0.996 gram per centimeter cube and 0.80 gram per centimeter cube. And the surface tension of water is 7.2 into 10 to the power minus 2 Newton meter inverse. Calculate the surface tension of the organic liquid. How many times a water drop is heavier than a drop of the organic liquid? So first, because we are given the drops of the liquid 1 and 2, which is organic liquid and water, we will use the drop number method. So we will use the formula gamma 1 by gamma 2 is equal to n2 by n1 into rho 1 by rho 2. So gamma 1 can be taken out as gamma 2 into n2 into rho 1 upon n1 into rho 2. Now we given that the number of drops of organic liquid is 55 and the density is 0.80 gram per centimeter cube. So this can be written as 8 into 10 to the power 2 kg per meter cube in the SI units. Similarly, the number of drops of water is 35 and the rho 2 is 0.996 gram per centimeter cube, which can be written as 9.96 into 10 to the power 2 kg per meter cube. So gamma 2 is equal to 7.2 into 10 to the power minus 2 Newton meter inverse. Now, if you substitute the values, you will get the surface tension of organic liquid as 2.63 into 10 to the power minus 2 Newton meter inverse. Now the next question was how many times the drop of water is heavier than a drop of the organic liquid. So just see, your formula is m1 by m2 is equal to gamma 1 by gamma 2. So if you take the ratio of mass of water by mass of organic liquid to the surface tension of water by surface tension of liquid and you just substitute the values, you will get the ratio of mass of water by organic liquid. So we just substituted the values of surface tension of water, surface tension of organic liquid, and we get that the of mass of one drop of water is actually 2.74 times the mass of organic liquids. So which is what was asked in the numerical. Now, let's briefly take a look at the other methods of determining the surface tension or interfacial tension. So, Wilhelmy plate method is one of the methods which can be used. Now, these are some methods which are not commonly used for measuring the surface tension. The most commonly used method for measuring the surface tension is the drop formation method. So, drop number and drop weight method at the undergraduate level. Now, Wilhelmy plate method, it's a method to find out the surface tension over a long time interval. So this method can also be used. There is a method called a spinning drop method, and this method is ideal for measuring the low interfacial tension. Now, I'm repeating, what is interfacial tension? The tension at the interface between two immiscible liquids is called as interfacial tension. So spinning drop method is a method for measuring the low interfacial tensions. So the diameter of a drop within a heavy phase is measured while both are rotated. Then there is something called as a pendant drop method. This method can be used to measure surface tension and the interfacial tension both, and this can be done at elevated temperatures. There is something called a sessile drop method. This is a method for determining surface tension and density by placing a drop on a substrate and measuring the contact angle. So these methods, like I've said, are not very commonly used, but these are methods that you must know the name of. Now we come to one special property which is called as paracore. So paracore is a constant which is a characteristic of a liquid and is defined as the molecular volume of the liquid at a temperature where its surface tension is mu T. It is also defined as the product of the molecular volume and the fourth root of surface tension. It must be remembered that this is a scientific quantity and can be used to solve the structural problem. So whenever you want to use surface tension to solve a structural problem, you will have to use this property called as paracore. So paracore can be written as gamma to the power of 1 by 4 into m by rho, where gamma is what? Surface tension. So gamma to the power 1 by 4 is the fourth root of surface tension, m is the molar mass, rho is the density, and so paracore is equal to gamma 1 by 4 into m by rho. Now, it is clear that if you compare the paracore values of two liquids, it effectively means that you are comparing the molar volumes under the conditions that the surface tension has been taken as equal for the two liquids. So, if you want to compare the paracore values of two liquids, you have to assume that the surface tension values are equal for the two liquids. So, P1 by P2 is equal to dm1 by dm2. And this paracore is called as an additive property. Why is it an additive property? Because it is dependent on the molar volume, which is an additive property. So paracore is also an additive property. So if you take two liquids and mix them with one another, then the paracore value that you will get for the resultant liquid will be the sum of the paracore of the two liquids. Now, what are the phenomena which are based on surface tension? Small insects walking on the liquid surface, the shape of the drops, the capillary action, the moving of the water in a paper, the water rising into the capillary. All these are surface tension dependent phenomena. Uh, the wetting of a liquid, the wetting of the surface by a liquid, all this is due to the surface tension phenomena. Now, let's look at surface active agents. These are also called as surfactants. Surfactants are nothing but detergents. So detergents are surfactants or surface active agents. And what kind of structures do the surfactants have or a detergent has? The detergent has the same kind of structure that the soaps have. It has a hydrophobic tail part which is oil soluble. It has a hydrophilic head part which is water soluble. So a detergent is nothing but the sodium salt of long chain benzene sulfonic acid. What were soaps? Soap was sodium or potassium salt of long chain fatty acids. where these are sodium or potassium salt of the long chain benzene sulfonic acid. Let's take a look at their structure. So this is the kind of structure that the detergents have. They have a hydrophobic part which is made up of carbon and hydrogen mainly. So it is the hydrocarbon tail that they have. Then they have a hydrophilic part which is actually an ionic part which has sulfonic parts with the sodium ions. So you have the sulfonic parts as the hydrophilic portion. Now, these detergents are able to reduce the surface tension of water by forming micelles. What are micelles and how are they formed? Now, you know that water is not able to itself clean any cloth. So you have, let's say, dirt or oil sticking on a cloth and you want to remove it. If you wash it with water, you will realize that it doesn't get washed effectively. Whereas when you dip that same cloth into a detergent solution or a solution of water and detergent, then you will find that when you lather it well and rub it, the detergent is able to remove that oil or the dirt. How is it able to do that? Because it has a hydrophobic part and a hydrophilic part. So this hydrophobic part of the detergent gets attached to the dirt and the hydrophilic part gets attached to the water molecule. So can you see these are the detergent molecules? The hydrophobic part, the hydrocarbon chain, gets dissolved in the grime, oil, dirt, and the hydrophilic part is towards the outside. So the hydrophilic parts, the ionic parts are towards the outside and they attach to the water molecules, and the hydrophobic part is inside the grime. Now this kind of structure that is formed is called as a micelle. Now when this micelle is formed and you rub the cloth or you put it in a washing machine, these micelles which have loosened the dirt from the cloth get removed along with the solution and the water. So that is why it is easier to remove dirt and oil from a cloth using a detergent than with the water only. Now let's just see this. So you have a detergent in the water. What will you see is that the hydrophilic portion, the ionic portion is inside the water, the tails are outside. You have to actually stir it well so that the lather is formed. Once the lather is formed, what happens is you can dip your cloth into the detergent. The moment you dip your cloth into the detergent solution, all the detergent molecules, they get attached to the dirt. How do they get attached? The hydrophobic portion attach themselves to the dirt and the grease part, and the hydrophilic portions are outside. Now when you rub, they get loosened, they form micelle, and when you wash them with water, they are removed. So this is how the surfactants work. Now, why is this happening? This is happening because these surfactants or the surface activants or the detergents are able to reduce the surface tension of the water, or they are able to reduce the interfacial tension between the water and the grime and water and the oil. So when that tension is removed, the dirt gets picked up and can be washed off easily. So that is how the surfactants work. Now let's try and study about viscosity. Viscosity is another property of liquid which is very important and really studied in detail in the undergraduate labs. So what is viscosity? Viscosity is the resistance to the flow that a liquid experiences when it is trying to flow. Now, how will you define it scientifically? Let us consider a tube, a narrow tube, and the new tube has a liquid flowing through it. Let us assume that the liquid is flowing in cylindrical coaxial layers. What am I saying? We are saying that there is a narrow tube and the liquid is flowing through it, and this liquid is flowing in large number of thin cylindrical coaxial layers. So you have one layer like this, the other layer like this, and they're moving, right? Now the layer which is going to be closest to the wall of the tube is going to be almost stationary. Whereas as you move towards the center, these layers will have increased velocity. In fact, so much so that at the center they will have the highest velocity. So I'm repeating, the layer which is closest to the cylindrical tube wall will have the lowest velocity. In fact, it may be stationary, and as we move towards the center, the velocity will increase and it is going to be maximum at the center. Now, the fluids will resist the flow gradient. Why will they resist the flow gradient? Because you have layers moving over one another. So there is a faster moving layer and there is a slower moving layer. Now this slower moving layer, because it is in contact with the faster moving layer, will apply a resistive force on the faster moving layer to slow down its speed. This speed will get slowed down. Why? Because there is a frictional force between the two layers. So the speed of the faster moving layer will decrease because it is in contact with the slower moving layer. So this viscosity is also said to be the resistance that one part of a fluid offers to the flow of the contiguous part of the fluid. Now this resistance produces a frictional force which is known as the viscous force or the viscosity. Now this viscous force is going to be proportional to the area of contact between the two layers. So there are two layers and they are in contact. So the area of contact A between the two layers and the velocity gradient. That is the difference in velocity between the two layers per unit distance. So the velocity gradient and the area of contact are the two factors on which this viscous force is going to depend. So when you have a proportionality, F is proportional to A into dV by dx, you remove the proportionality by adding a constant of proportionality which is called as eta and is defined as coefficient of viscosity or eta. So Greek letter eta. So F is equal to eta A dV by dx. Now, how will you define this eta? We have said this is the viscous force, this is area of contact, this is velocity gradient, and eta is coefficient of viscosity. But how will you define coefficient of viscosity? So coefficient of viscosity is numerically equal to F when area of contact is 1 and dV by dx is 1. So this concept that eta is numerically equal to F when A is 1 and dV by dx is 1 will be used to define it. So how do you define this? Coefficient of viscosity is defined as the force per unit area required to maintain a unit velocity gradient between two layers. So the coefficient of viscosity of a liquid eta at a given temperature is defined as the force required per unit area of layers to maintain a unit difference of velocity between two parallel planes of the liquid unit distance apart in the fluid, or the way I had said before, the coefficient of viscosity of a liquid at a given temperature is defined as the force per unit area required to maintain a unit velocity gradient between two layers in contact, right? So what are the units of viscosity? Now, because it is force per unit area, for F by A into dx by dV, so eta will be having the units of what? So let's try and figure it out. The CGS unit of viscosity is poise, which can be written as 1 gram per centimeter per second or 1 dyne second per centimeter square. The SI unit of viscosity is written as Pascal, Pascal PA. So the short of the Pascal is PA, space seconds, Pascal second. Please do not take it as PAS, short form of Pascal. The short form of Pascal is PA, space second. So Pascal second. This can also be written as Newton second per meter square. Now we have talked about this when we did gaseous state, but now we are doing it as part of the liquid state. So 1 poise is equal to 10 to the power minus 1 Pascal second or 10 to the power minus 1 Newton second per meter square. Now, what are the factors which affect the viscosity? Very, very important property. You see it in your daily life. Some liquids are more viscous, some liquids are less viscous. We use these properties sometimes for, when you use a Zeldal flask, you want to attach a capillary to your thermometer. Then because of the viscous nature of sulfuric acid, you are able to attach that to the thermometer, the capillary to the thermometer, because sulfuric acid is also a very viscous liquid. Now, what are the factors which affect viscosity? There are some intrinsic and some extrinsic factors. Let's take them one by one. Now, one factor is molecular size. So, the more is the molecular mass, the more will be the viscosity of a substance. So, glycerol, glycerine is highly viscous because it has a high molecular mass. It is a big molecule and it has hydrogen bonding. So, right, the molecular shape. You have large and irregular shaped molecules, more viscous. If you have small compact molecules, less viscous. There are intermolecular forces, like I explained in the case of glycerol. In the case of glycerol, you can have hydrogen bonding. So the more the interactions between the different molecules, more will be the viscosity. You will have spherical shaped molecules, then they have low viscosity because they're compact. The more is the attachment, the more is the surface area in contact of the molecules, the more will be the viscosity, less viscosity. The strength of the interaction between layers, the number of particles. So sometimes if your concentration, so let's take an example of sulfuric acid. Now normally the students wouldn't notice that sulfuric acid is highly viscous because we provide them dilute solutions of sulfuric acid. But if you were to see the concentrated sulfuric acid, you will realize that it is highly viscous in nature. So concentration also makes a difference. Now let's take a look at the extrinsic factors. So one of the extrinsic factors that is very important is pressure. So when you increase a pressure, there is an increase in the forces of attraction, and when the forces of attraction will increase, there will be an increase in the viscosity. So pressure increase, attraction, interaction increases, viscosity will increase. Now, sometimes when you add small quantities of non-electrolytes like sucrose, glycerol to the water, there will be an increase in viscosity. Obviously, water is less viscous, but when you add glycerol to it, you add sucrose to it, the solution is going to be slightly concentrated. It is moving from water towards a solution which is concentrated. Viscosity will increase. So polymers, they enhance the viscosity of solvents. Strong electrolytes, they will decrease the viscosity because strong electrolytes are ionic in nature. They tend to bind with the water molecules. So the interaction will decrease and viscosity will decrease. Now, most important effect is due to temperature. When we defined viscosity, it was defined as coefficient of viscosity is defined at a given coefficient of viscosity at a given temperature is defined as, because viscosity is a temperature dependent phenomena. In fact, out of all these intrinsic factors that we discussed, the size, the shape, most of these factors are something that we cannot control. These are the intrinsic properties of those liquids that we are talking about. So if you have a liquid which has large molecules, it will have high viscosity. If you have a liquid which has small molecules, it will have low viscosity. These are things that they are property of the liquids. Then the pressure effect. When you increase the pressure, yes, the viscosity increases. But normally, how much increase in pressure do you do at normal experiments? You normally keep the pressure as 1 atm. So that effect is also very much not important when you are doing it in the lab. But what is important is temperature. The temperature changes affect the viscosity to a very large extent. And you know how the temperature changes in India. Let's say in India, if it is winters, the morning temperatures in Delhi would be somewhere around 10 or 12 degrees centigrade. The afternoon would be around 25 degrees centigrade because the sun has there. The evenings are going to be cooler. And because of these things, the viscosity of the liquids will change. Now, how much do they change, and how can you get an idea of what the viscosity of the liquid is going to be at a given temperature is given by this equation. This is an Arrhenius type of equation. So, important thing is when you increase the temperature, the viscosity of a liquid will decrease. The fluidity will increase. तो अगर आप किसी चीज को गर्म करते हैं, when you increase the temperature of a liquid, the viscosity will decrease. This dependence of coefficient of viscosity of the liquid on temperature can be expressed like this. This is an Arrhenius type of equation. The Arrhenius equation that you did for kinetics, that was what? K is equal to AE to the power minus EA by RT. But this is not minus EA. This is eta is equal to AE to the power of EA upon RT, where A and EA are constants for a given liquid. and EA is called the activation energy for the viscous flow. Now, in contrast to the liquids, eta will increase with temperature in the case of gases. You remember we have done it in the gaseous state. The eta increases with temperature for the gases because there is momentum transfer from one layer to the other. Whereas in the case of liquids, the fluidity increases when you increase the temperature because the kinetic energy of the molecules have increased, the intermolecular attraction decreases and the fluidity increases. So what you see is that in the case of liquids, you have a relationship like this: eta is equal to AE to the power of EA by RT, whereas in the case of gases it is eta is equal to mkt to the power of 1 by 2 divided by pi to the power 3 by 2 sigma square. So this dependence shows that eta for gases is proportional to the square root of absolute temperature. Just to recapitulate, the variation of viscosity with temperature and pressure. So in the case of liquids, the viscosity decreases as you increase the temperature. In the case of gases, viscosity increases as you increase the temperature. In the case of liquids, it is relatively independent of pressure. In the case of gases, the viscosity will increase as you increase the pressure. Now, let's try and measure viscosity. So, the measurement of viscosity is done using an instrument which is called as Ostwald's viscometer. So, the Ostwald viscometer looks like this. It has a broader arm and there is a thinner arm. They are connected through a U-tube. The broader arm has a larger bulb. The thinner arm has a smaller bulb, and there is a capillary below the smaller bulb. And what happens is that you pour the liquid into the broader tube using a pipette. This liquid is sucked up to the level above the smaller bulb through the capillary. This liquid is then allowed to drain off through the capillary from upper mark to the lower mark on its own weight, and you note down the time of flow. That is, you note down the time of flow between the upper mark, liquid flowing from the upper mark to the lower mark. So, what is this viscometer based on? So, this viscometer is based on the Poiseuille's equation, which says that the rate of flow of a liquid in a laminar manner is related to the viscosity. So, if there is a liquid which is flowing through a capillary tube of radius r for a time t, under a pressure head of P, the volume of V which is issuing from the tube is given by this equation, which is called as Poiseuille's equation, where L is the length of the tube. Now, if the dimensions of the capillary and the volume of the liquid flowing through it are taken as constant. Now, what are the dimensions that we are talking about? Radius. So, if they are taken as constant and volume is also taken as constant, then this equation can also be written as eta is equal to K into P into T, where P is the pressure head and T is the time of flow, and K is the constant which is made by a combination of all the constant in the previous equation. The pressure P at any instant which is driving the liquid of density G through a capillary of a viscometer is given by H rho G, where H is the difference in the height between the levels in each limb of the instrument. So let's see. So you know that the determination of absolute viscosity is difficult, but we can find out the ratio of viscosity of two liquids using this Ostwald's viscometer. Now, because you are using that small bulb and you are measuring the time of flow between the two marks A and B, the volume is taken as constant. So, although H will vary throughout the experiment, the initial and final values will be the same in every case. Hence, P will be proportional to the density. So, the relationship between the viscosities eta 1 and eta 2 of two liquids 1 and 2 which have densities rho 1 and rho 2 will be given by eta 1 upon eta 2 is equal to rho 1 upon rho 2 into T1 by T2, where T1 and T2 are the times of flow. So what you do is, how do you perform this experiment? You take two liquids, and now I said you cannot determine the absolute viscosity, but you can determine the relative viscosity. So you take one liquid whose value of viscosity is known to you. Then you take the other liquid and find out its viscosity, taking the first liquid as the reference liquid. So what do? You take your Oswald's viscometer. You first take one liquid, pour using the pipette, transfer it into the Oswald viscometer through the broader arm, suck it up through the smaller arm, then you clamp it and you note down the time of flow between mark A to mark B for liquid 1. You must take at least 3 observations for the first liquid. Now you drain out the other liquid, just turn it upside down, let the liquid drain out, clamp it on something and let it drain out fully. Then you rinse it with the another liquid and then suck up the liquid to again the mark A, which was above the lower bulb. Again note down the time of flow between the mark A to mark B, that is the level above mark A to the level below the bulb. So now you note down the time of flow. So you have two time of flows. You know the ratio of density, or you know the densities of the two liquids. So you can find out the ratio of viscosity. In fact, you can find out the viscosity of the other liquid also, because you know the viscosity of the first liquid. So if you know the time of flow, you know the densities, you know the viscosity of one liquid, you can find out the viscosity of the other liquid using a Oswald's viscometer. Now, this method requires the measurement of densities using an SG bottle. But suppose you do not have an access to the SG bottle, you can utilize the method of measuring the masses of equal volumes of the liquid. When you do that, then you can use the formula as eta 1 by eta 2 is equal to m1 by m2 into t1 by t2. You have to just take equal volume of the two liquids in the weighing bottle, measure their masses, and you can use this in the formula. Now let's take a look at this numerical. Water requires 120.5 seconds to flow through a viscometer, and the same volume of acetone requires 49.5 seconds. If the densities of water and acetone at 293 Kelvin are 9.982 into 10 to the power 2 kgs per meter cube and 7.92 into 10 to the power 2 kg per meter cube respectively, and the viscosity of water at 293 Kelvin is 10.05 Pascal second, calculate the viscosity of acetone at 293 Kelvin. Now what is the formula that we can use? Eta acetone by eta water is equal to rho of acetone into rho by water into T of acetone by T of water. You just substitute the values and you can get the value of eta acetone, and it comes out to be 3.275 Pascal second. Please solve it. Only then you will become familiar with the numericals. Now let's talk about vapor pressure. Now all of us know about vapor pressure. We have studied in detail in the previous classes also, but we will just define it for our understanding. Vapor pressure is the pressure exerted by a liquid's vapor on its surface at equilibrium. Now this vapor pressure is due to the liquid evaporating, forming vapors, and these vapors then exerting a pressure on the liquid. That pressure is called as the vapor pressure when the rate of evaporation has become equal to the rate of condensation. Now vapor pressure and boiling point are very much related to each other. In fact, they are so related that they are exactly inversely proportional to each other. So just see these examples. We have diethyl ether, ethanol and water. Now when you increase the temperature, you go from 0 to 20 to 30 degrees centigrade. The vapor pressure of the diethyl ether changes from 185 torr to 442 torr to 647 torr. In the case of ethanol, similar thing is happening. When you increase the temperature, the vapor pressure is increasing. When you increase the temperature for water, the vapor pressure is increasing. But just see something else also. Diethyl ether is more volatile. In fact, it is the most volatile of the three liquids, and it has a boiling point of 36 degrees centigrade. At low boiling point, it has high vapor pressure. Ethanol, which is less volatile as compared to diethyl ether, how do we know? Because it has a higher boiling point. At higher boiling point, it has lower vapor pressure. Just see the values as compared to diethyl ether. And in the case of water, which is having the highest boiling point among the three, the values of the vapor pressure in TOR are very, very less as compared to diethyl ether and ethanol. So you must understand that the vapor pressure increases when you increase the temperature, and the liquid which will have a higher boiling point will have lower values of vapor pressure. The liquid which will have lower boiling point will have higher values of vapor pressure. Now we come to what is called as boiling point. So boiling point we already know it is the temperature at which the liquid's vapor pressure becomes equal to the external pressure which is applied on it. So the normal boiling point will be the point when the pressure has become equal to 1 atm. So this property of the liquid is very important because we study about boiling of liquids since we start studying science. So boiling point, and this property is used as a method to separate mixture of liquids through a method which is called as distillation. So we need to know boiling points, vapor pressure, distillation when we are talking about liquids, because these are the properties which control major characteristics of the liquid. So let us define one another thing that you already know, molar heat of vaporization, delta H vaporization. It is the amount of heat required to change 1 mole of a liquid to a gas at constant temperature. So delta H vaporization will have units of joules per mole. And the condensation, the molar heat of condensation is going to be just reverse of molar heat of vaporization. So let's just take a look at these 4 tables to get an understanding of how the boiling points change with the characteristics of the molecules. So just see, you have noble gases. The molar mass of the noble gases is increasing on the x-axis and the boiling point is increasing on the y-axis. Now you see, as the molar mass is increasing, the boiling point is increasing. Why? Because the van der Waals forces of attraction between the noble gases is increasing. As the interaction is increasing, because the size is increasing, therefore the molar mass was increasing, and because the molar mass was increasing, the size was increasing, therefore the boiling point also increases as you go down the group or as the molar mass increases. Now just take a look at these straight chained hydrocarbons: methane, ethane, propane, butane, pentane. These are all straight chain. We have taken methane, ethane, propane, butane and pentane. Now as the molar mass is increasing, the length of the chain is increasing, the interaction will increase, and therefore the boiling point will increase. Just see, you go from 1 carbon chain to 2 carbon to 3 carbon to 4 carbon to 5. The chain is increasing and these are straight chains. So the interactions will be more and the size is more and the interaction is more. Therefore the boiling point is increasing as you are going down the table. Now just see the example of HF, HCl, HBr and HI. In these cases, also similar things are happening. When you compare HBr and HI, same thing is happening. HCl, HBr and HI, same thing is happening. But when you compare these three with HF, you find something different. Why is that difference there? Because in the case of HF, you have an electronegative atom attached to hydrogen. So there is a possibility of hydrogen bonding, and because there is hydrogen bonding, therefore the boiling point is going to be higher as compared to the other three. Similarly, in the case of H2O, H2S, H2SE and H2TE, when you go down, the molar mass is increasing and therefore the boiling point is increasing. But for water, it is an exception. It has a very high boiling point. Why? We know that is because of the hydrogen bonding in the case of water molecule. Whereas in these three cases, there is no hydrogen bonding. So their boiling points are lower than that of water. Much lower than that of water. So with this, we wind up liquids today. We have studied intermolecular forces in the liquid. We have talked about surface tension, viscosity, vapor pressure, boiling points, and we have discussed in detail what are the characteristics of the liquid and how we can measure these properties. So with this, I wind up today's lecture. Thank you so much. Stay home, stay healthy, study well, take care of your family and friends. Bye bye.